Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to see so many people here today. As Jonathan said, I'm the head of aid effectiveness at the OECD, so overseeing the monitoring survey on the Paris Declaration, also the preparations for Busan and the negotiations on the Busan outcome document. So I've been told that you're an audience that's up to speed on all of this, so I won't go through the kind of background in great detail, but what I will talk about is what we've learnt from the monitoring survey and the other evidence. There's the shadow report from the CSOs, the independent evaluation of the Paris Declaration, and also the survey of fragile states. So what's the evidence telling us about what happened in Paris? And then also look at what messages that provides for the organisation of the conference in Busan, and then tell you a little bit more about the outcome document and the timetable between now and HighLevel at the end of November, what will be happening. So, as I've been told, you already know all about the Paris Declaration. I won't go into any detail, but as you know, it was signed in or endorsed in 2005, and what was interesting was that there was a monitoring survey. So in addition to making commitments, those who signed up would be monitored and measured and reported on to see whether they were meeting their commitments. So we have got four main sources of evidence, some on monitoring, so looking at whether commitments have been implemented, but also the independent evaluation of the Paris Declaration, which has been really important in terms of finding out whether it actually mattered. So what? If you give aid differently, does it actually make any difference to development? And I'd also encourage you to look at the shadow report from the CSOs. I'm sorry I don't have the exact details of that. I'm sure Gideon can update us on that later, because that again provides good information about what's actually happening in country and what's happening particularly from the CSO point of view. So in terms of the monitoring survey, it looked at the 12 indicators, around 56 commitments that were in the Paris Declaration, and within that we did a survey of what was happening in fragile states. So recognising that fragile states are different, and that there's some specific issues about how donors and governments should behave in fragile states, which have a serious impact on whether aid can support effective development. So if we move forward, well, the results are in, and they're sobering really, and progress is happening in the right direction, but it's not happening to the extent and at the pace that was foreseen in 2005. So at the global level, only 1 out of 13 targets that were established for 2010 have been met, and that's the target on coordinated technical cooperation. So that's measuring the extent to which donors coordinate their efforts to support countries' capacity development objectives. However, even within that, there has been progress, and particularly when you go donor by donor or country by country, there's some really interesting evidence there. And I would encourage you to look at the progress report, because you can learn a lot about why things have changed and in particular why they haven't. So often there's been a problem where something has been assumed to be technical, but actually it's political. So there's a number of issues where progress has been slower than we expected. So the survey results show, as I said, a mixed pattern. But I think one of the really encouraging outcomes has been from the independent evaluation of the Paris Declaration, which has found that aid effectiveness does matter for development. So even if we haven't met the targets that we were aiming towards in full, we are going in the right direction, and it's the right thing to keep moving in that direction. I think that's very important for Busan. And the independent evaluation found that it's a successful international compact for reform, that the norms and standards in the Paris Declaration are legitimate, and they're legitimate just beyond aid, that they actually apply to other forms of development finance, including providing an organising framework for countries' own domestic revenues. However, we need to sustain the political momentum behind the reforms embodied in the Paris Declaration and the Accra Agenda for Action. And one of the strongest lessons that's come out of the experience has been how important the accountability and learning that's taken place through having the monitoring survey, and in particular having the discussions country by country when the evidence comes out, because that enables mutual accountability, and it enables everyone to learn why things have worked, and if they haven't worked, why they haven't worked. I think we got feedback from Zambia that said it's like holding up a mirror to see the good, the bad and the ugly, in terms of I think the good was the progress, the bad was the policies, and the ugly was the politics, but that was essential. I'll just show you for some of the targets so you can see globally on the different indicators where we are. And I won't talk about them one by one, but I think you can get copies of this presentation at the end of this event. But just to see where we're coming out, the arrows in black are the targets, the actual performance, and then the arrows in blue to the right-hand side are all where we should have been by 2010. So just some key messages coming out of this, particularly on the donor side. We found that they're using developing country systems more than they were in 2005, but the decision to use them or not is not strongly linked to the quality of those systems, and we have numbers of cases where countries have strongly improved their public financial management or procurement systems, but they're not being used, and conversely cases where countries have very weak systems but they are being used a great deal. So it's not evidence-based decision making there. We found that overall donors didn't make much progress in untying aid, which is surprising given the focus on value for money at the moment, and we know that untying aid can lead to getting 20 to 30% more impact out of aid. So a number of paradoxes there. There's been little progress in implementing common arrangements. There still seem to be institutional bottlenecks to actually working together. Also, aid is becoming increasingly fragmented, and actually this is somewhere where maybe the way to meet this challenge is to look at how to manage the fragmentation at country level, because actually as we're looking at having an outcome in Busan where we have even more actors signing up, the idea that things could be controlled from the outside is maybe the wrong way to go. And also medium-term predictability of aid continues to be a challenge, and communication on future aid intent is still very poor. On countries in fragile states, interesting that there's very slow progress there among the donors on improving international coordination and also giving future indications of spend. And that's particularly challenging and particularly difficult in fragile states, because where national capacity is weakest, there's a greater need for coordination amongst the partners, and also there's greater need for confidence into the future that development funds will be delivered. However, as I said, we know that the principles of aid effectiveness matter for development. That's what we found from the evaluation, and that's something that has really driven the design of the Busan conference, but also the outcome document. And you'll have seen from the third draft of the outcome document that it identifies some principles up front that we know matter for development, and it calls on all the parties who will endorse the document to recognise those principles and look at how they can implement those principles in their own aid and development efforts. So something that's an interesting finding in itself out of the evidence gathering process, the monitoring process, is just how important that has been to countries. If we look at the numbers of countries who've stepped forward to take part in the survey, which isn't an easy thing to do. I mean, it takes up a lot of their time, and often quite difficult conversations with development partners in country. We've seen that total of countries increase from 34 in 2006 to 55 in 2008 and 76, actually 78 now, in 2011. So we're covering more than 3/4 of official development assistance now with this survey. And the countries themselves find this an important process to go through, and it's particularly because they are able to have discussions with their partners in country. We've also found that if we look at things at the country level, that's where we're able to bring in some of the non-traditional partners. In some countries we do have statistics from China, and there's a number of non-DAC donors that are reported on in 10 to 20 of the countries. So that process has been important, and I think that that offers a sign that this idea of having an inclusive compact or an inclusive framework that can be anchored at country level is the way to go, and is a goal for Busan. Also, it's proven to be remarkably cost effective. So, for example, the last survey, even if we include the 5 workshops to roll out the survey around the world and all the data gathering and the analysis, that was less than €2 million to cover more than 3/4 of global aid. So this model of people working together because it's in their interests is quite an interesting model, and I think that that's something we should take forward as we look at what comes after Busan. So what does this mean for the conference itself? Well, we've designed the 3 days of HLF4 to make sure that we do look at the evidence. Day 1 is all about looking at what have we learned, what's happened since Paris, what's the evidence telling us, bringing people together to discuss what are messages that they want to be raised with ministers on the 2nd and 3rd days. And that also, as I said, is reflected in the structure of the outcome document, which is built around some common principles which have emerged from the evidence, and which also, as we've looked at what other partners who haven't been involved in this conversation before, for example, if we look at the Chinese white paper, we can see these principles emerging. The language, the labels might be different, but the basic principles are there. Things like ownership and leadership and aligning with national plans and partnership are very strongly in the development principles of all the parties coming to Busan. So the 2nd and 3rd days of the high-level forum, when all of the ministers will be there, the focus will be very much on what are we going to do. We hope to have the outcome document endorsed during that period, but also take things further and allow small groups, or maybe even larger groups of people who've come to Busan to say, this is what we're going to do in this area. So we have what we call building blocks. It enables groups to go even further and not wait for consensus, not wait for everybody to go at the same speed. So the agenda of the conference is really focused on what are we going to do, and holding people to account and having public statements at the ministerial level. And again, that's picking up on a message from the evidence, which was that the politicians became delinked from the technical work, and often where there's been a blockage, it's because something has been left as if it's technical when it does need to have the political level engaged. So of course this all needs to be held together by an outcome document which is political but which holds parties to account, and that's what we're working on at the moment in Paris. We're calling together a group of Sherpas to represent the main groups who will endorse the outcome document in Busan. And I'll just give you the timetable of what's happening over the next few weeks. I think many of you will have seen the draft of the outcome document that came out after the last meeting of the Working Party at the beginning of October. And that's as far as the co-chairs of the Working Party on Aid Effectiveness could take it before Busan. And it's got some areas of square brackets, but actually what I found remarkable was how much of the text remained intact and how much consensus there is on the structure and the aim that we have, shared principles, we have common goals, and that we each achieve these goals in differentiated ways, but that we're all moving in the same direction. So as many of you will know, the Sherpas will meet in Paris on Friday, 4th of November, and on that day we'll look at those areas which were flagged as lacking consensus, so the areas in square brackets in the 3rd draft. Then we hope by the 9th of November that it will be possible to circulate a record of the discussions on the 4th of November, and that would be released to all the delegations going to HLF4. That gives them an opportunity to work with their Sherpas about what they might want in the next iteration. The second meeting of the Sherpas will take place on the 18th of November in Paris, and the aim there is to reach consensus on all outstanding issues. And after that, our aim is by the 23rd of November to at the very least have a record of the discussions available for all the delegations who are going to HighLevel Forum. Between the 23rd and the 28th of November, the Sherpa Group may seek to meet again, have additional discussions, but the aim is that we get a near 100% document to take to Busan. After Accra, we know we can't keep everything. When there's politicians involved, ministers involved, we can't keep everything locked down, but the aim is to do as much of this work up front. So that was just a very brief overview of what's happening, and I'll leave it now because I can't kind of second guess what questions you will want to raise, but I'll hand over to my colleagues to make some comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Brenda. That was a really good summary. Yeah, very good summary. I've got a lot of questions. I'm sure everyone does, but we are going to go along the panel first.